It's really good to see you all relaxing in these comfy chairs. And if you fall asleep, I won't hold it against you. It's been a long day, I know that. Lots of great content. Now, this is not the greatest of content. I'm effectively rehydrating an old talk that, on some work that COLEAT did, creating a tool to replace horrifying line of business or vertical apps, or if you're German, Fachverfahren, something like that, you know, in the sad world of Visual Basic macros driving Microsoft Office, etc. So either way, COLEAT, it can smooth migration, so that's the argument. I'll have a video of it later, but here's what you do. So you take your application.exe, something like that, and whatever arguments you normally pass to it. And instead of running the application, you run COLEAT before it, so you add this magic word at the beginning. It's amazing. And so then what can it do? Well, it can do several things. It can either trace the application, so it can get it to use Word, for example, and it will trace all of the COM automation that's being used for that. So it does a number of magic things, which we'll look at in a second. And it will then list all of the things that it's doing. So it's like an API dump of what your macro is doing, or your VB compiled app, or your C# app, or well, all those things. And so it can do that, but then it can also redirect it and use, well, LibreOffice, LibreOffice, whatever. I think all of our stuff is upstream, so it should do either. So yes. So how can it do that? That seems crazy, right? Well, that's a very good question. And so well, it turns out that it's actually possible to do this broadly. So I've called it lineofbusiness.exe here. So what we do is that we essentially load this as if it's under a debugger. So we load the application in a stopped mode. So it does all of its linking and its setup, and it just waits until we say go. And before we say go, we jump into the process and we start patching effectively all of the lookup, all of the function lookups that are done there. So there's a thing called the IAT on Windows, which I guess on Linux would be like elf symbol-driven relocations, and you can take all of these functions and redirect them. And so we grab some particularly useful things, and this is not all of them, but things like, well, this is a nasty one, but co-create instance is essentially the entry point for COM. So you pass a string name into that and it creates your component. And so we instead hook into that, get class objects rather similar. Particularly we hook into loading new shared libraries. So as DLLs are loaded, we instrument those as well. And so typically we would either hook it or just fall back to what was originally called. And then we replace those with wrappers that either inject the tracing or that then forward the calls to LibreOffice instead. So, that's what I just said. Look at that, fantastic. So things like load library, it's good that I knew what I was talking about, isn't it? Load library W and these things. And then we have all these sort of proxy objects that we stick in between. So VB6, so some of the VBs, I think VB5, and we've seen vertical apps that use not only VB5, but also VB6, and also C# and also C++ components, all in the same exe file, which is quite exciting, or DLLs that they pulled in. So VB6 is particularly cool because it doesn't use invoke really at all. So it actually compiles into the exe files real vtable trampolines and direct execution of vtable slots, which is kind of cool, and I suppose could be quicker even as well. But it makes it rather more difficult to intercept them. So we basically, you get your 31337 native performance here, So we've implemented something called genproxy that generates trampolines and compiles all of those and sticks those in so that we can effectively redirect all of their calls to the slower but nicer iDispatch invoke, so we can then interface them. So the good news of that is that then we can trace all this VB6 compiled code as well and interpose it. So the other thing that's actually perhaps much easier if you're a programmer and you can actually control these applications it's just to tweak the create object call. So, you know, if you're writing VB script, for example, then you just do create object, and instead of word, you put writer. It's that complicated, you know. Now, of course, it doesn't solve all of your problems because our COM APIs are not complete, and they're not a complete mapping here. They're pretty good for some of the things that people want to do. And if they're not, you know, there are amazing support services that we can put in there to tweak them. So, of course, one of the things that COLEAT can do is effectively do that under the hood for you without you needing to change the code. And why might you not want to change the code? Well, the application this was primarily focused at was a very odd VB4, VB5, VB6, and other mess that was written to talk to a HPUX database backend for healthcare records. And one of the slightly downsides of it was not possible to get another copy of the HPUX mainframe, which was being screen scraped by the Visual Basic, to fill out the Microsoft Office forms with, you know, I'm sorry you've been ill, please report hospital type letters. So really, really difficult to deal with it. And of course, this wonderful application that was at the center of patient care was written by some rather unhelpful large major consultancy out there who wouldn't get out of bed for, you know, any sum less than 7 digits or something. And so, you know, we're just left with this horrible, horrible problem that can't be solved unless you can get in and get in between these things and make it work. So here we are. So the code changes upstream all since 6.2. And yeah, let me actually, I've got a little video here somehow of it actually working, the tool recorded. Let me see if I can slide that off onto the other side. Embiggenable. I can't see my mouse over there. That's the only slight problem. It's not as good as it could be, is it? You can see it. I can't.
A bit to the left, yes.
Yeah, and I suppose it's probably if I double tap this, it might even get bigger, might it? Ooh, it's too exciting. Technology, and then if I press space, it's starting to play. Ooh, fade. So, you know, Tor has very cleverly written text on the screen. So this is just a very simple little app that does a few things, and you can see the code here. So, you know, before it's closed, it says, do you really want to close it? It's kind of a useful callback hook that you can put in. And so then, of course, you can run it with Microsoft Office. And, yeah, typing should not be done in public. So here it is, a little button, VB app. You run Word, and it loads the thing. And then it says it's waiting, and you've got 2 documents here open. And do you want to close them? And that's coming out of the VB pop-up, so that's all good. And then we can see what that looks like in terms of COM API usage. So you can do COLEAT, and you can ask it to trace the thing. And then again, the same program, same parameters. Obviously, no parameters here. It's running, and so we can run Word. Unfortunately, not seeing the trace while it's generated. And do you want to close it? Do you want to close it? All those pop-ups. And so here you can start to see, okay, so you can start to see if I can pause it and maybe move backwards slightly, and maybe you can see it there. Did I pause it? Fantastic. So you can see some of those COM calls that were made. So you can see at the top here, it's creating a new Word.application, and then it's setting a few properties, make it visible, and so on, load this document, open this path, and so on. And this is basically what's going on as we get those methods calls coming into Word from the this is exciting, isn't it? No hands needed. At the VB script. So anyway, you can see the trace of what's happened there, and then I think there's probably another version here where we essentially take the thing and instead then of using Microsoft Office, we can click our Run Word button, and in fact we don't get Word. We get LibreOffice, and you know, all is good. And in fact, well, we get these 2 documents that it was there's a suspenseful black bit there, and then you know you get your VB dialog popping up. Do you want to close them? And essentially, you generate the same trace then. And the VB script never knew that it was using something better and more powerful and freedom-loving at the end, which is kind of cool. So I'll get rid of that, I guess. We're back to here. Brilliant. So, yeah. So So all the core changes have been in for ages now, and this is not particularly new technology, you can see. One of the questions we had when we wrote it was, should we just build the ability to clobber Microsoft Office into LibreOffice so that when you install it, you have an option that says, pretend your Word and pretend your Excel, and we just steal those COM IDs. Of course, it's not entirely clear what that would do to Windows system over a long period and stability and so on, but it is at least an option. So there's nothing really to stop you stealing those things. Clobbering, whatever. Either way, the code is, well, there's all sorts of documentation up there, pretty pictures, the very video I just showed you online at this link, and you can grab the code there and you can see the joys of binary IAT patching on Windows and building trampolines and so on. Just to reiterate, because I showed this to someone and they then said, wow, can we run our VB macro, our VB script automation stuff in Collabora Online and deliver it to people's tablets? I was like, no, actually you can't. This is a Windows-only nightmare, and it will not work with online. So it's really very much a stopgap migration solution to help people slowly, move to something new and not be tied to their legacy Office suite whilst keeping their vertical apps their staff are happy with. So it's far from a perfect solution. Our VBA support is following the 80-20 rule, which is that, 80% of the work takes 20% of the time, or, and then the last 20% takes. But I think it's probably worse than that with VBA macros. There's a huge API there. So we have this incomplete, OLE 2 compatible API, but we have a pretty complete tracing thing. So we have good stubs for most of the Windows COM API, so we should be able to see what it's doing. And then we can fix and expand that API if we need to, which also makes more VBA macros work. So the VBA macro support uses basically the same APIs under the hood, which is kind of cool. So there's some commonality there. And that's pretty much my talk. So, hey, thanks very much. And thanks again to Tor for fixing it. Are there any questions? I've probably gone quite short. Gentleman at the back. I can rely on it. I hear all my perfect clack. There's always a question. I love it. Go for it.
This time I have a really good question. Last time it was just because no other questions.
Well, that's good. Quality question.
I have some nasty idea. You will like it. If you say it only works on Windows, have you tried it on Wine?
Yes. There's always one, isn't there? Yes. So yes, of course, it's possible that it would work under Wine. If you really want to run, Wine on Linux, you could probably. Yes, I don't see why it wouldn't. It's Wine works at such a low level, and fundamentally, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. Of course, the idea of using Wine to run your VB script to then make it work in online, it's like you're still not going to get it into online, right? Like it only takes you.
Could you Wine into the Collabora server for that?
Well, all hacks are welcome. Yes, do that. But I think that's going to become a plug-in, not the core feature. But yes, that's good. Good question. Any other thoughts, comments? Anyone have horrifying problems with Windows binaries compiled full of junk? Okay. Well, there you are. Thank you very much.